Chapter 4. Sofadisakul mansion was in a havoc. Lady Ladita and her husband had rushed home from the military event upon hearing the bad news, and the mother fainted after reading the letter left by her son before he vanished into thin air. General Youth called out for a maid to bring an herbal inhaler for his wife. Soon, a security guard walked in to give him a report. I've checked the security footages at the gates and the fences. The cameras were disconnected at around midnight as if someone had planned to do it, sir. That task was a piece of cake for a culprit who happened to be a mechanical engineering student like his son. The former general pinched his throbbing temples when his wife, who came to, started wailing. Why did you do this, Tian? You could have told us what you wanted. We can give you anything. There's nothing we wouldn't do for you. Tears ran down the mother's chubby face. The young man had just told her the night before that he wouldn't hurt her, and here she was crying out for him as if her heart was breaking into pieces. Calm down, my love. Everything's going to be okay. Our son's a grown up man. He's physically grown up, but not mentally. An adult wouldn't do this to his parents. He could have told us the truth. Lady Lolita retorted, upset by her youngest son's behavior. Youth let out a long, heavy sigh, then sat down before his wife. Because he knew that had he asked, you wouldn't let him go. Am I such an irrational person? She cast a distressed glance at him. You're a woman of reasons, except when it comes to Tien, the former general said matter-of-factly. When you learned that he had a heart condition, you were all over him like a mother hen. That's why he was acting out. After the surgery, you still put restrictions on him, not letting him out of the house and see the world without your permission. He was recovering and not a prisoner, said the general. Tears ran down her face at the last sentence. You're saying it's my fault that I'm being overprotective of our son? It's not your fault, but overdoing it can be negative. That's why Lord Buddha said the middle way is the correct path. Not too much, not too little, and your life will be peaceful and content. Middle way is Buddha's teaching about treading carefully between two extremes. Tian said in the letter that he wanted to search for happiness. I don't get it. He has this house, his car, and all the money he could ask for. He had everything handed to him. What else does he want? Syria Youth smiled lightly. That's what we call happiness. But to him, it must be something different. As a military officer who served his country, Thera Youth was content that his youngest son took the courage to break away from his comfort zone to face the wild world, and that he wasn't being confined in the extravagance his mother had showered on him. Yet, his main concern was, where was it that his son planned to go and whether he was safe? The former general called his subordinate, who was still active in the military unit, and asked him to investigate his son's disappearance immediately. Once Tian's motive was known, and if it proved to be harmless, he would send someone to watch over him from afar, so that the young man would be able to experience life as he intended to. After he'd succeeded in calming down his wife and accompanied her upstairs to rest, he returned to the first floor and picked up the letter again. Dear Mom and Dad, I'm writing this letter with a heavy heart, but please know that this is not me running away from home. After my miraculous survival, I began to see the world upside down. All my life, I felt hallowed inside, and I don't know what it is that I really want. I just want to see what others always talk about. I never knew the things they knew. I guess what I want to say is that it's not a reckless action. Please don't look for me. When the time comes, I'll be back. Please don't be worried. Love you both so much. Yan. The former general silently folded the paper in his hand. He only wished that his youngest son would soon find the answer that he was looking for. The bus shook as it ran along a train track, and the man who was leaning against the window woke up from the vibration. The sun was streaming through the gap between the thick curtains. Tian yawned widely, then looked at his wristwatch. The hand struck at 2. He fished out his cell phone from the jeans back pocket out of habit and found that there was no incoming call. It was supposed to be so. He had deactivated all the tracking apps that could trace him down and changed a new SIM card so no one would be able to reach him and ask him to come home. The wealthy young man moved his joints, feeling cramped. He had lost his balance when he jumped over the fence out of his mansion and walked to the main road at 3 a.m. Turned out getting a taxi at that hour was a bad idea, and by the time he made it to the bus station, he almost missed the bus. Tian lifted the water bottle to his lips and drank, then pried the curtains open to look at the countryside. He didn't know if people back home were aware of his disappearance yet. If they did, he hoped they would respect his written wish. The first class air conditioned bus took a turn and stopped at a gas station for the passengers to get out of the bus to relax and use the toilets. Even if the bus took 10 times longer than an airplane, it was much harder to track down. Tian was certain no one would expect a spoiled brat like him to choose this more difficult route. In a few hours, he would reach the intercity bus station in Chiang Rai. Thrill ran all over him once he thought about it. From what he knew, the village that was his destination was in a military protected area, guarded by a barrack at the borders. It took a complicated, winding route to reach there. The barrack had agreed to send a soldier to pick him up and look after his journey. The bus's engine roared up again, signaling to all passengers to return to their seats. A few minutes later, the big bus was on a highway, heading towards the destination without any stops. By 4:30 p.m., the vehicle arrived on time to the main station in Chiang Rai. Yan grabbed his backpack from the overhead rack, slung it on his shoulder, and got down the bus. He looked around in bewilderment at the unfamiliar territory and decided to follow the other passengers. The main bus station was vast with an open high roof. All of the long benches were occupied by commuters who put bags and reed baskets filled with the fruits around their feet. He saw an old, tough looking jeep with a governmental license plate in front of the station and didn't know if it was the one sent for him because there was no driver in sight. The slender man put down his heavy backpack and leaned against a pole to look up the numbers of the foundation staff who was his emergency contact. He jumped when a voice came up behind him. Are you the teacher from Sengtong Foundation? Being called a teacher, the man thought of himself as a fake, gave out a dry smile. Just call me Tian, please. He eyed the soldier in green t-shirt and camouflage pants who was just a little younger than his father. Y is a traditional Thai greeting influenced by India that shows cordial and respect towards the other person. You can do so by putting your palms together at the level of your face. There are 3 levels: under the chin for someone junior, at your face for someone at the same level, and slightly above your lips at your senior. Yes, Krutyen. Still, the man called him a teacher. I am Staff Sergeant Yod Chai. You can call me Yod. The soldier introduced himself with a provincial tang in his accent. Is this all the gear you've got? Come, let me help you. Yandin stopped the man from taking his backpack and put in at the back of the jeep because he was used to someone servicing him. He got into the car that had no window pane. The veteran jeep's engine was ignited with a roar. It rolled into the street. It was a military vehicle with a single canvas as a roof, letting the wind in with a loud noise. Tian lifted his hand to wipe away the beads of sweat that ran down his forehead and seeped around his hairline. Staff Sergeant Yod let out a laugh. It's hot now, but wait till you're uphill. I promise you'll search for a blanket. I won't be sleeping at the barrack, will I? He asked because the foundation staff had told him that he would be staying in a house, but they didn't say where. Your house is in the village. The barrack is uphill, 3 kilometers away. Tian nodded and listened to the senior staff sergeant tell about the village that they would reach within 2 hours. Papandao is a tiny village of Ulo Aka hill tribe who had settled on Thai soil for generations. Their descendants now have Thai citizenship. In the past, they made a living out of opium trade. Once eradicated, a royal father had sent someone to teach them how to make a different kind of living. So now they grow tea, coffee, and winter flowers. When we're in the area, just look over at the ridges and you'll see the plantation terraces. Ulu Aka, also known as Hill Tribe, they were the first Aka settler in Thailand's territory and are mostly found in Chiang Rai province. An hour later, the jeep arrived at a narrow dirt road flanked by dense trees. Staff Sergeant Yod told the younger man that this bumpy path was collaboration between the soldiers and the villagers who covered the soil together years ago. Even if it was just a road made of rock and compressed soil, it shortened the travels uphill and downhill. The sun that was setting against the horizon made the temperature lower. Diane curled up on the passenger seat from the cold, listening to the hum of an Isan traditional song. Staff Sergeant Yod's hometown, with cricket sounds until the jeep took a turn and came to a halt at the curb. Isaan is the northeastern part of Thailand. Lutien, it's time to take a hike. Staff Sergeant Yod gave him a broad smile. A hike? Tien forced out a smile. How far is it going to be? Not that far. I took you along a detour to the far end of the village because your house is right over there. If I stopped in the front, then it's 5 kilometers on foot. From here, it's just two. An easy walk. Easy, my ass. The volunteer teacher had never experienced any hardship in his life, glared at the soldier. He normally drove his car if the distance was more than 50 meters. Now he had to hike up a steep hill with a big backpack for kilometers. Staff Sergeant Yod saw the younger man's sour look and blurted out, It's going to be a bit steep over there. He volunteered to take the backpack, and all the younger man had to carry was a flashlight. The sky was turning dark. The soldier led the way, pacing hurriedly before the reptilian world would come to life. Tian cast the light from the lamp as big as his palm to the ground before them and saw a steep path that led to a narrow passage into the village. Luckily, he had started working out, following the surgeon's advice, and he would definitely make it. Staff Sergeant Yod pointed towards a hut in a shade 10 meters away. The wealthy young man was bending over his knees, panting. We're almost there. Hold on. The man in front shouted, showing no signs of fatigue despite his age. Tian rose to inhale the cool air into his lungs and marched on. The smell of burnt woods, accompanied by white smoke, reached them. He looked for the origin and spotted a simple, makeshift fireplace, rocks that formed a circle with woods on top of them, now burnt black that created a bright flame in the middle of the darkness, right in front of an old hut. A long shadow cast out from the hut caught his eyes. He followed it until he saw a tall, muscular figure, a man who stood with his arms crossed, looking away from the hut as if in reverie. Even if he wasn't carrying a rifle or wearing a uniform, Tian recognized the broad shoulders that looked like a solid rock cliff right away. The flashlight fell from his slender hand with a loud clang. The light was killed and the face in the shadow turned towards him in darkness. Tian was riveted by an intense stare, and the world stood still, except for his heart that was thundering and spreading the pang across his chest. Then the new volunteer teacher slumped to the ground, but before he knocked himself out, the officer rushed in and grabbed him, putting his arms around the thin waist. Tian's smooth cheek touched the broad, strong chest, even more solid than he had imagined. But once he realized he was cradled in another man's arms, his face turned red hot. The wealthy young man kept his eyes shut with a deep frown, unable to stop his errant heart from beating violently, thundering against his rib cages. Are you all right? Hearing a deep voice next to his ears, Tian jumped and pushed the man away, sending himself to the ground. Teacher! Staff Sergeant Yod rushed in but didn't forget to salute his commanding officer. He then pulled the thin arm and helped Tian to his feet. The young man brushed the dirt from his jeans and glanced toward the young, tall, muscular officer. Damn you, giant. How could the man let him fall on his butt like that? I'm okay. He turned to tell Staff Sergeant Yod, who gave him a worried look. Well, Krutien. Staff Sergeant Yod spread his hand towards the troop's commanding officer, who remained expressionless. This is Captain Pufa, the commanding officer of the 3307th Infantry, Pafra Pirun, operating base. Pufa means Rocky Mountain, and Pafra Pirun means the god of rain cliff. Ian pressed his lips in frustration that the handsome face was glaring at him as if he was a nuisance. Do I have to salute you as well? The sarcasm rolled off his tongue, but the other man seemed to be unperturbed. No need to. Just a Y is enough. It was Tian's turn to be speechless. He reluctantly lifted his hand toward the other man. Staff Sergeant Yod saw the awkward exchange and jumped in. Captain, Crew Tian will take Crew Odd's place. He referred to the previous volunteer teacher who lasted only 3 weeks before giving up and packing his bags to leave this harsh place. The young officer nodded in acknowledgement and pointed towards the hut. Leave your belongings there. You have all the necessities that I've arranged for you. He stopped and then continued with the words that made Tian want to kick him. I hope you know how to use them. Is there a manual? Tian retorted. Just some simple gears. If you don't know how to work with them, I'll have someone bring you the manual. The officer's voice was so solemn that he couldn't tell if the man had aimed for sarcasm. Thank you. Tian chose to let it slide, not wanting a verbal duel with the massive officer. He took the backpack that Staff Sergeant Yod handed to him with a dry smile and stormed off towards the elevated bamboo hut with a thatched roof. Staff Sergeant Yod saw how Tian was struggling to use the broken stairs and turned to the officer. You still haven't told an army engineer to fix them? I've been busy with the loggers the past few days, so it slipped my mind. Pufa answered impassively and paused. I don't think we have to. He won't be staying for long. Don't judge the book by its cover, Captain. Crew Odd looked like a tank, just like the rest of the villagers, and he couldn't make it. The commissioned officer let out a long sigh. His sharp eyes were filled with a heavy emotion, as if he had something on his mind that couldn't be shared with others. You think a boy who just hit his puberty, dressed in expensive clothes from head to toes, will make it through the semester? It's 3 months, he emphasized. The sergeant chuckled sheepishly. He'd better keep his mouth shut on the matter. How did you get here, though? I parked the jeep at the end of the entrance. With a motorcycle borrowed from the base. Even if the route was winding, rough, and steep, it wasn't something someone who already had lived 4 years here couldn't manage. You wanna go back together? Riding at night is dangerous. It's fine. I'm used to it. See you at the base, Sergeant. Uva abruptly ended the conversation and walked to straddle over the vehicle. He started the engine and rode off against the cool wind. Then, he stepped on the brake as if something just came to him. He hadn't told that new teacher what tomorrow's tasks would be. Forget about it. The young man didn't appear to be a morning person, so once he finished with the morning inspection routine, He would come by the hut later. Making up his mind, the officer sped up and headed towards the base that was 3 kilometers away. The small bamboo hut was sectioned into an empty, rectangular living space in a narrow balcony. Kian looked for sockets in the dark before remembering that electricity and pipe water didn't work at this location. How could the villagers survive? He placed the backpack in a corner and caught a glimpse of a big kerosene lantern. The youngest son of an influential military officer sat down cross-legged and lifted the lantern to inspect under the moonlight that streamed into the hut. He noticed that there was an inscription in English in tiny letters across the other end of the base that bore the lamp's brand name. He looked around for the flashlight before realizing that he had dropped it outside. He didn't bother to pick it up, so he grabbed the cell phone that became useless due to the lack of signals and turned on the flashlight function. Squinting his eyes to read the tiny words, his sockets became sore. Even if he never used such a device in his everyday life, he wasn't so dumb and unable to use it. There was an instruction written on the lamp after all. He put the lamp on the floor, made of bamboo strips, and turned the base until he found a plastic can pump. He pushed it in and out 10 times, turned on the burner, and twisted the fuel tank cap to the right. Seconds later, a big flame flared up, making him jump. After a minute, the flame didn't dim, and Tien was afraid he'd burned down the hut. He reached out reluctantly and twisted the fuel cap to the left. The flame dimmed and looked safe. The city boy touched his chest, relieved, and moved the lamp to the wall so it wouldn't stand in his way in the tiny hut. Looking around, he spotted a small writing desk, an old mattress, and a tender blanket, a cotton pillow with a hole, and a grayish mosquito net on the floor. Luckily, the floor and the walls were clean and dust-free. He guessed someone had cleaned the hut up before he arrived. The young man wrapped his arms around his knees for a while, sitting and not knowing where to start, and decided to start with hanging the net. Even if he had been in reserve officers' training corps in high school, he was sleeping in a tent or using a canvas as a roof. The young man clumsily unfolded the grayish-white net. There were strings on all the four ends, so he guessed he could hook them with something. He looked up at the poles and the walls and found some loose nails. Tian wrapped the strings around them and finished with a flabby and even net. He let out a heavy sigh and slumped to the floor, exhausted. His stomach growled, breaking the silence as a reminder that he hadn't eaten anything solid since noon. The shapely eyebrows knitted in frustration, thinking of the tall, imposing officer. Why would he come to see him empty-handed? Couldn't he have brought some food along with him too? As the wealthy young man lazily crawled towards his backpack, remembering that he had cereal bars, his eyes caught a glimpse of a three-tiered stainless steel tiffin box, or pinto, and a bottle of water near the doorframe that he hadn't seen at first. Tian swallowed thickly, realizing that he had misjudged and cussed at Cruthor Fun's beloved captain. Yet he shrugged nonchalantly. The man didn't hear a thing, anyway. He reached towards the food carrier, starved, and once he opened it, he found omelette, clear soup with egg tofu, and rice that had already turned cold. How did Captain Pufa know that he didn't eat spicy food? Might be a pure guess, or whatever, but his stomach was digesting itself with the gastric juice. He no longer cared if the food in front of him would be drenched in spices. He was going to devour it anyway. If someone who knew Tian Safadisakul, a young master who only dined at five-star restaurants, was seeing him right now, the person would be in shock to see how he was using a zinc spoon to munch on the dry rice. When someone was hungry, even the saddest, driest omelette was delicious. Even the clear soup that barely had any meat became a real treat. Tian finished up the food, leaving no single rice in the carrier, and gulped on the water. I'm so freaking full right now. He let out a remark in the empty hut. Then he started taking out his belongings from the backpack. Tian wanted to take a shower before bed, but it was late and he didn't know where the bathroom was. His slender hand stopped mid-track as he pulled out a small bottle of shower cream. Captain Pufa and Staff Sergeant Yod hadn't told him anything about the bathroom, and it would be senseless to look for one in the middle of the night, especially when the hut was surrounded by woods. So he'd lay down to sleep, unwashed. Tian carried the mattress and laid it out inside the net. The musty smell reeking off the mattress stopped him from lying down, but he couldn't sleep in a sitting position, could he? He closed his eyes and dropped himself down, putting his head on the hard rectangular pillow, staring up at the flame reflection on the ceiling. He reached for his cell phone out of habit and remembered there was no cellular or internet signal. He threw the phone that had become a pricey paperweight on his side and let out a long sigh for the hundredth time. Crickets and insects chimed in with a cold breeze that blew silence and solitude into the hut. Tears welled up in the almond eyes. "What are you doing here, Tien?" Late morning came and the sun was shining over the complex mountain ranges. Yet the young man, who fell asleep in the clothes he'd been wearing the day before, still curled up inside the flappy net. A tall figure in a greenish khaki t-shirt bearing an emblem of a royal crown with a ray over a rowel on the left chest and camouflage pants stood with hands on his hips, dismayed at the sight of the new teacher, who was still sound asleep. The captain put down the flashlight that the city boy had dropped on the ground and cast his eyes towards the burned-out kerosene lantern. The fuel cap that had been left on halfway let him know that the lantern had worked on all night and exhausted the oil. Even if the boy wasn't so dumb, knowing how to make the lantern work and taking care of himself, he was still careless to leave the lamp on. Perhaps the hut had to burn down before he'd realized that the device required benzene, not battery, to make it work. Pufa took in a deep breath and chanted Budho in his mind to calm himself down. Budo is a Buddhist chant to honor the Lord Buddha. He reached out to lift the four ends of the net, then crouched down to shake the boy who was hugging himself in his sleep. "Yen, wake up!" The young man who was being roused turned on his side in annoyance. The captain frowned and bent down to whisper not too gently next to one white ear. "If you love your easy life so much, why bother coming here to be a volunteer teacher? Why don't you run back home to your warm, nice bed?" Tian sprang up into a sitting position once he realized he was no longer in his own bedroom in Bangkok. His nose almost touched the officer's rough cheek. Did he touch him? He didn't, did he? The handsome face reddened like a cherry, while the other man remained impassive. The young military officer slowly rose to his feet, stretching up to his full height, and spoke in an authoritative voice, as if giving a command to his subordinate. "Get up and take a bath." The wealthy city boy rubbed his face to brush away the embarrassment and raised his voice in defiance. I know. Where's the bathroom anyway? You didn't say a word about it and I had to sleep in these smelly clothes." "Not far from here, but you'd better not be going there at night. If you need a toilet, there's a latrine at the back of the hut. I've walled it up for you." Tian couldn't imagine what a latrine looked like, but anything that allowed him to relieve himself would do. He fetched his belongings from the backpack, the unpacking left unfinished, and held them in his hands. Huval looked at the clothes, a bar of soap, and a toothbrush in the new volunteer teacher's hands. "Follow me," he said briskly. Tian rushed off after the imposing officer. Once an order was issued, Hufa briskly turned and stormed off. The sun was blasting outside and it hurt his eyes, but he finally saw Papandao village in full view. The villagers lived only 10 meters away from his hut, and their houses looked similar to his, except for the sizes. The city boy looked at the people and the children in peculiar, colorful local costumes. Some of them wear normal clothes, so he assumed that the community had taken on the modern world's influences and mixed other cultures with their own. This was why they were open to and encouraged education, comparing to other villages that still clung to their own tribal identities. Tian was nervous. Wherever he turned, all eyes were on him as if he was a monster. Once he looked back at them, they looked down with a sheepish smile. Then Captain Pufa stopped in front of the biggest house in the vicinity. Is this where the bathroom is? Tian asked. No. Pufa was economical with his answer as usual. Wait here till I return. He strode on the stairs to the second floor, leaving the younger man in a shade in front of the house. Soon, the captain returned with an elderly man who had an air of kindness around him. Then, meet Uncle Biengler. He's the leader and the village chief. You can call him Kama. Tian raised his hands to perform a Y. He knew how to keep his manners after all. Greetings. Greetings to you too, teacher. How was your sleep? The man who was the Kama, or the wise one, who acted as a bridge between the village and the outside world, replied in Central Thai dialect with the tang of his native accent. It was fine, but there were too many mosquitoes. Tian rubbed his arm that bore many bite marks. That was because you didn't tug in the ends of the net. Captain Pufa cut in, irking the younger man. That was because I didn't know how to use it. You said you'd bring me the manual. The captain went silent and uttered with an absolute seriousness the way he did last night. My apology. I didn't know that you really needed it. Tian's thin lips formed a mischievous grin. You don't need to write one for me. Just spare a little bit of your time to teach me, would you? All right then. I'll come to see you at the hut this evening, Wufa said. It was Tian's turn to be stunned. What kind of a man you are. But before another bout of verbal ping-pong could start, Uncle Biengler thrust a plastic bowl at new teacher. You'd better hurry up to take a bath. It'll be too hot by noon. Tian took the bowl, bewildered, as he saw a black chunk of something in a plastic bottle filled with brown liquid. What are these? Bamboo charcoal soap and soap berry herbal shampoo. The shapely eyebrows cocked as if to ask why he needed them. He'd brought his own personal care products. Once you reach the bathroom, you'll know, the captain answered, the corner of his mouth lifted into a light smile, amused for what was about to happen. Both men bowed farewell to the village's leader and walked on. The scorching sun turned Tian's fair skin red, and he was wiping the sweats from his forehead and neck, and staring at the tall man's solid back under the tight t-shirt as the captain strode in front of him with no signs of exhaustion. It finally got on Tian's nerves. Why did you have to build a bathroom so far away from the hut? You're going to be drenched in sweat when you're on your way back. The captain heard a low whine, but said nothing as he pointed a finger towards a spot in a spare forest not far away. Tian's eyes followed and his mouth was agape. He sprinted past the officer and stopped in front of a wide creek that lied below a cascade from a steep cliff. The waterfall was crystal clear, so clear that he saw fallen leaves on the bottom of the water. The city boy turned pale. He turned around facing the young captain that stopped next to him. Where's the bathroom? He knew he was asking the stupidest question since the answer was right before his eyes. Here's your natural bathroom, Ufa emphasized. You want me to strip and bathe here? Not in a million years. There's another option. You can borrow a bucket and a wooden beam from a villager and fill the water from the creek into the earthen jar behind your hut. Tian didn't back down from the captain's intense glare as if wanting to shout in protest. Are you freaking kidding me? It seemed Fufa received the silent message. I'm not kidding. He nodded in an affirmation. You have to take the water back to your hut if you want to use it. No exceptions, even for the villagers. You don't have groundwater? Groundwater wells existed all over the countryside, did they not? The officer who had skipped his duty to play a babysitter for this troublesome city boy shook his, feeling fed up. The budget ran out once it reached the foot of the hill. He was referring to the vultures that had snatched their sums long before the money was funneled into real development projects. How does your remote barrack survive then? The military has its own budget. We've got a groundwater well and electricity from the generator at Pafrapiran operating base. Yan snorted and grumbled, annoyed. That's not fair. What do you want? The young captain asked in a stern voice. I don't have the whole day to babysit you. The new volunteer teacher pressed his lips, fingers gripping tight on the plastic bowl. It was torn between the two choices. It was harder than choosing between Gucci sunglasses or Todd's loafers. After careful consideration, he gritted his teeth. I'll be right here. Use the charcoal soap and the herbal shampoo that I've asked Uncle Bien Clair to give his share to you. Pamok Waterfall is the natural water resource that feeds the whole village. Don't contaminate it with the chemical substances in the products you brought. Pamok means foggy cliff. Tian glanced at the herbal goods in the plastic bowl and sneered with disgust. The soap was blackened and the shampoo looked like feces. How could the captain expect him to clean himself with these? Captain Pufa frowned in dismay. Do not underestimate folk wisdom that's been passed on for generations. Herbs are proved to be as good as modern products. I know. The wealthy young man waved his hand to dismiss the captain's remark and halted mid-air as if something came to him. I'm going to get naked in the stream. I hope you're not thinking about keeping an eye on me. I am, Kufa answered in a firm voice. You haven't been officially introduced by the village chief, so you're still an outsider. If you commit a wrongdoing against someone's daughter, I would be in deep shit. He swallowed the last words as the city boy went on with his retort as if he didn't hear a thing. Look, Captain, I'm a guy just like you. True. But you're neither my friend nor my cousin. I can't be bare ass in front of you. You might not be embarrassed, but I am. The young captain tried his best to understand the rich prude's logic and decided to extend his courtesy. All right, I'll look away. Just get on with it. I'm extremely grateful to you. Tian shot him a sarcastic remark, his eyes following the tall captain, who walked towards a tree to sit down under the canopy not too far away. He turned to busy with himself with a sigh. The stench that clung on the clothes made him strip the t-shirt with bright graphic prints and the skinny jeans off. He left his underwear on as he didn't have enough guts to stand naked and offended the forest and mountain's guardian spirits. A warm breeze and a plum of heat from the sunlight touched his skin until it turned red. The sweat on his joints made him feel itchy. Tien stepped on the rocks underwater and used the plastic bowl to scoop up the water. He held his breath as he rubbed the dark charcoal soap on his skin. The sweet jasmine scent that touched his nostrils made the wealthy young man who had never used plain soaps lift the bar with great bubbles to sniff. Not bad, it actually smells nice. Tian poured the brown liquid from the plastic bottle and found out that it wasn't made of buffalo dung as he'd thought. The slender hands rubbed vigorously on the scalps until the shampoo got in his eyes. The cool stream around his waist gave him an urge to roll sideways and fall into the deeper basin next to him. The bubbles clung to the fair, slender figure that happily dived up and down the water, forgetting how he had despised everything on this unfamiliar territory. The man who sat under the tree looked at his watch, realizing that he had deserted his duty for far too long. The captain rose to his feet, brushing off the dirt from his camouflage pants and walking back to the spot he had been earlier. He saw the worn clothes next to the new ones on the rock, but the man who should have been here was nowhere in sight. Pufal looked around for the young troublemaker and saw that the guy was swimming under the cascade that thundered from the ridge. Yen, stop! It's a whirlpool right there! He cried out. The cascade's force that hit the basin had created a whirlpool underneath. He didn't know if the brat heard him, but the end was disappearing right before his eyes, without any signs of struggle. A millisecond later, the young captain was pulling out his combat boots. Fuck! A loud curse rang through the woods, followed by a big splash of water. Hoofa dived down and found the city boy laying face down at the bottom of the waterfall. Once he reached out to grab the slim waist, the younger man started struggling, his arms flailing and poking into the captain's face, prompting him to choke on the water. Hoofa reached out to grasp the thrashing limbs, but Tien was throwing his arms around his neck and locked him into a tight grip. The young captain thrust upwards over the surface with a vengeance spirit plastered to his back. He turned sharply to glare at the boy who was resting his chin on the broad shoulder. A sweet herbal shampoo scent that lingered in the air made him become self-conscious and aware how close they were. So close that the tips of their noses almost touched. Hoofa raked his eyes from the chin to look into the gorgeous pair of eyes that were shone with mischief and felt his blood pressure rise. He took a deep breath to quench his simmering anger. You tricked me. The deep voice emphasized each word. Tien's rosy lips formed a big smile, the kind of smile that could blind. I really have a cramp, with or without the whirlpool. Yeah, right. The captain's slur was stripped with sarcasm, as he looked at the younger man who was trying not to laugh. Still, a soft chuckle slipped out. Tian smiled, pleased that he pranked the big, towering captain to be drenched. He clung like a leech as the other men waded through the water until they reached the shore. Get off! Fufa gave a dismissive order and was about to climb on the shore, but Yen tugged at his t-shirt with a fake sad expression. But I can't feel my legs. Fufa narrowed his eyes. Then he bent over and put his arms under the brat's knees and scooped him up in a bridal style. One long stride from the powerful legs, and they were up on the shore with the captain holding the half-naked and stricken young man in his strong arms. The heart was racing like mad, pumping the blood to Tien's reddened cheeks as he felt his male dignity vanish into thin air. He didn't know if he should be furious or ashamed, and started hitting the thick chest with his fists, shouting, You prick! Let go of me! Well, you said you can feel your legs, didn't you? I'm going to carry you home. Isn't that what you want? The intense eyes that looked at Tien meant business. Being carried like a bride in underwear? What the hell is up with the captain? Tien threw his arms around the strong neck, pulling the other man down and shouted into his ear, I am fine! Let go of me! All of a sudden, the young captain dropped the slender form down and Tien almost lost his balance. He glared vehemently at the handsome face, unaware that Pufa was staring at the long scar in the middle of his chest. Yet, the young officer chose not to comment on it. He bent down to pick up the towel and threw it at the naked man. Dry yourself and get dressed. What about you? Ian felt a nagging sense of guilt, seeing how the captain's green t-shirt and camouflage pants were soaking and dripping. I'm okay. Once I take you back to the village, I'll return to the camp. Pufa said dismissively and told the other man to hurry up. The wealthy young man turned his back to the captain and quickly put on his dry clothes. his lips trembling and his body shivering. As they headed back towards the village, side by side, he stole glances at the dark, handsome face, the authentic Thai male beauty, and thought about handing the towel to the captain. Yet he stopped himself. Why is his heart quivering inside his chest? Stop confusing me, Torfan. End of chapter 4.